And when you pray toward this place where the temple stood, this place, this holy city, Jerusalem, when you pray toward this place and confess your name and turn from their sin because you have afflicted them, then hear from heaven and forgive the sin of your servants, your people Israel. Teach them the right way to live and send rain on the land and give your people for an inheritance. Let's just stop and think about it, that his practice was to go into his home to that window that faced the west and to kneel down and 3 times a day pray, thinking about that city, thinking about the God of that city. Why is that so significant? Because as he looked to the city, he was reminded that the God he prayed to was a covenant-keeping God. That's what Solomon was talking about. He's reminded that this God has made promises to his people. He's reminded that this God is a forgiving God. And so he would fall on his face, confessing sin, confessing the sin of his people, and yet anticipating a day in which God would bless his people, anticipating a day in which God would restore his people, anticipating a day in which God would save his people. All of this is what's welling up in his heart every time he went and bowed down. You say, how could a guy survive living in that environment 70 plus years? How could a guy survive in that pagan environment? This is how he survived. 3 times a day, on his face, facing Jerusalem, remembering the God of his people and the promises that he makes. That's how he survived. And that's why Daniel would say to you, dear brother or sister today, never, no matter the threat, perceived or real, never stop the practicing of your faith. Because listen, it's not just our faith, but it's the one our faith is founded on. He is the one who will sustain you. He is the one who will help you. He is the one who ultimately will deliver you. Daniel would say this, whatever you do, don't forsake your faith, because in the forsaking of your faith, you would forsake the one of your faith, the one your faith is founded on. Keep looking to him. David prayed regularly 3 times a day, probably because of Psalm 55:17. Evening, morning, and noon, I cry out in distress, and he hears my voice. He prayed consistently. This was his practice. He prayed faithfully, as on his face he gave thanks to God. 3 times a day, day after day after day. Listen, Daniel counted the cost. He knew the stakes were high, but he still lived out his faith in the living God.